All right. So now that we know a little bit about you, and obviously we can't speak for all of our communities, but how we've experienced our journeys, both on a personal and professional level, I think it's so important for us to talk about the gender pay gap, right? Because before we can talk about how to advance, money is a huge factor, right? One day we were looking at a quiz that talked about unnatural causes related to health. And one of the determining factors of health outcome is wealth, right? And so my question to you all is to really unpack what this means, because we know that for every dollar a white man makes, an average person who identifies as a woman makes 81 cents. But if we look at these numbers closer as it relates to women of color and Black women, we see that for every dollar a white man makes, a Black woman makes 69 cents. For a Latina or Latinx, for every dollar, it's 53 cents. For American Indian and Alaska Native, for every dollar, it's 57 cents. And for Asian women, for every dollar, it's 90 cents. And I want to note that the number for Asian women is a bit higher than the other numbers that I mentioned, but we've been talking about that, while higher than the average, certain ethnic groups within the Asian continent still receive less pay than average. And this also doesn't exclude discrimination and xenophobia. So I wanted to unpack that a bit more about what you've seen in the workplace. What are your thoughts on this, and what are some barriers you've seen in your personal careers that you feel contribute to the pay gap? So I want to kick it off with Yichin, and we're going to go backwards. Yichin, Luvir, Farah, and Christina.
So many there, so much to talk about. But I think, for me, the lack of public information available really sets us up, right? I think if you think about how you negotiate your salary, you think about doing the research on like Glassdoor or these places that give you an average of what the salary is. It doesn't show you the equity side of things. And so you oftentimes, I think the lack of public information, and then also the lack of transparency on a lot of the institutions' pay scale really means that you're starting in the deficit. And the way that I think about this is, if you don't know what is the right salary to ask for, and you go by whatever public information is available, that means that's your starting point. The further back you start, that means the more you have to end up, right? I think the pay gap is accumulated over the time of your career. And oftentimes we already start so far behind, and to have to make up for that gap over the time of our career is impossible. And I think for me personally, there is a lot of internal narrative about, underselling your own skills, and then, having to overcome the imposter syndrome of wanting to advocate for more pay. And so I think all of those are contributing factors to why the pay gap is as wide as it is currently.
Thanks so much. And you all continue having this conversation. I'll just learn.
Yes, and to add to what was just highlighted, and I agree with everything that was just highlighted. One big factor for me has been working for a private company. The mantra has been, "Oh, we don't discuss that, in this company." And in terms of that mantra and that narrative, a lot of people become, I guess, assimilated and say, okay, I'm not supposed to do that because this is against the company culture. But only until, I'd say, the past few years, I said, you know what, there's a way to work around this. So the way that I've tried to work around this is I need to highlight to myself and to my managers, whoever they were at the time, you know what, this is what I'm doing. So I started to get much better about promoting myself and my accomplishments in venues such as LinkedIn and other places, where it's like, you know what, if you don't notice me on your own, other people will, and they will start telling you about it. And that strategy has helped me out to an extent, but there's a lot more that needs to be done. And just like was pointed out a few minutes ago, sharing that information, not even just publicly, but internally, in my case, will be a game changer. And that needs to happen, because I can almost imagine some of my colleagues who happen to identify as male, they, I'm sure, are making a lot more than me in my role, even with my tenure. So I'd say one of the things that's helped me out is, you know what, let's have other people see what I'm doing and get this into my manager's ear to at least help out a little with the pay gap.
Yeah, and I see people in the chat already interacting and just talking. Like literally, when you said imposter syndrome, both of you were talking about your experiences. Folks were like, "Yeah, it's real, right?" Because that correlates with how we see ourselves and do we promote ourselves, and that who do we know and who do we network with, which then lands us that next position or that next promotion. And so this is so much bigger than just being in one place and seeing that discrepancy in the pay gap. So thanks so much for sharing those thoughts. Fair, off to you.
Just to echo what my co-panelists have said, I wouldn't add too much other than the fact that, especially for someone who is still relatively early in my career, now about 9 years out from undergrad, I think early on, I internalized these very sort of harmful messages as far as, in some instances feeling like, it's enough that I have the opportunity. Let me not rock the boat too much. They took a chance on me or they gave me this opportunity. Like, I don't want to push it. And the reality is the likelihood that someone is going to rescind an offer because you want to negotiate is relatively low if they really value having you in their organization in the first place. So I think I had to sort of get that out of my head that I deserve to be paid what I'm worth, and at least having that conversation doesn't hurt. And especially as I, sort of progressed in my career and started learning from different mentors, also understanding that negotiation isn't always a monetary dollar either. It could be in various other kinds of benefits or flex time. Like, I'm not a morning person, so I always have to negotiate starting at 10 o'clock in the morning, for example. So just sort of understanding some of those nuances. But also, I think as women of color, sometimes we also internalize competition amongst each other. And that can get in the way in terms of, to Luvier's point, this information isn't always publicly available. So being able to connect with peers and colleagues to find out what the standards and expectations are in a particular company or in a particular field, I think can also help us go a long way.
But everything that you just said, for I know a lot of people can relate to and just think about, well, what does it mean to even think about this? And like, yeah, I'm earlier on in my career, but there's just certain things that are common, whether you've been doing this work for 20 years or 9 years, there's certain things that we continue to see because it's more of a systemic issue. And I like the point that you mentioned that it's more than monetary, right? Just the ability to do work and to be able to take that parental leave and to feel supported by your colleagues is just as important. So thanks for adding that in. Christina, what are your thoughts on this?
All right. So I agree with everything that's already been said. So thank you, ladies, for sharing all of those insights. I was trying to think, I was like racking my brain. I'm like, what else can I add? So a few other things I would like to add. Well, first and foremost, I teach job-seeking engineers. So my program that I work at, it's a startup based in San Francisco, but we work primarily with job-seeking engineers. We help with their interpersonal communication skills training, as well as their technical training to pass the technical interview process. And so part of the program is actually teaching our engineers that negotiating is part of the interview process. It's not weird. It's not you being difficult to go into a space and be like, hey, I've done the market research. I've been working for X amount of years in this field. I come with this value and this experience, and this is what I'm expecting. And at least giving some type of really calculated range already. And what I mean by range is not just looking at Glassdoor, not just going to PayScale or Levels or whatever other platforms out there. And I'm happy to share these in the chat as well, because these are the platforms that I use for my students. But also doing outreach to people that work at the company before you even apply, right? So reaching out to maybe say you want to go for a marketing role, reaching out to someone on the marketing team. And reaching out in a genuine way where you're building a connection, not just like, hey, can I chat with you to talk about salary? Like, no one's going to respond to that, right? No one's going to look at their LinkedIn message and be like, this is going to be a fun conversation. That's not what you want to do. You want to reach out and you want to say something like, hey, notice that you're doing this type of work at this company. I'm really interested in the product, or I'm really interested in the mission of the company. I would love to learn more. Could we set up some time to chat? I would love to learn more about your experience working there. And then having that genuine conversation with the person and asking them, what's the compensation like? What is the range, at least, that people are getting paid for this type of role, right? So you have all of this already in your back pocket before you even go into the interview, right? And if somebody's not willing to meet you there, because I don't know what reason, there could be a variety of reasons, then you should also know what your limit is in terms of the lowest compensation you'll be willing to accept. And if they're not willing to meet you there, then you know what, they're not gonna have you, right? They don't deserve you. So really, really doing that research. The other thing that I've learned from mentors and other career coaches along my journey and my path is also to keep your own list of accomplishments. So actually have a list, an Excel sheet, whatever the hell you want to do, and write down all the little things that you've done. Even if that means, you know, you're not an engineer, but you also help with the ERG. Maybe there's like a women of code or like a women of color group at the organization that you also help run. You can add that to your accomplishments. And then when it comes time to have that conversation with your manager or your yearly assessment or bi-yearly or whatever assessment it is, you are prepared. Like, these are all the things that I've done, and this is what I'm hoping to get in terms of promotion or in terms of a raise. So being really, really prepared. I hope that helps.
Yeah, I appreciate your response and your approach to that, right? So like recognizing there are barriers, but like some of that are things that we can sort of navigate, right? And what does it look like to know your worth, like being able to negotiate? And I see a lot of folks in the chat sort of connecting and filling you on, creating that project journal or, you know, talking about all the great things. And we don't always do a great job, especially as people who've been socialized as women, specifically Black women, brown women.
Yeah.
We don't do a really good job of I struggle with that even up till now. And so how do we sort of, you know, adjust and make difference in the system? So,
and one more plug.
Yeah.
There's also a free organization called the AAUW. It's totally free, and they literally have courses on training you on salary negotiation. Because I'm not going to lie, it's a scary conversation, right? Even my organization, Women with Purpose, we've done a lot of negotiation presentation and workshops specifically because women, especially women of color, are very, very afraid to have these conversations. They don't feel empowered to have these conversations. But if you are a white man, that's not even, you don't even think about it twice. You're like, oh, I'm definitely going to ask for 20,000 more. It's not even like it's not a second thought. You're like, no, this is what it says on the job description, but I'm going to ask for 10,000 more. Like, they don't even think twice about it. So we have to get to that point too.
Thank you for sharing that. I think there's a study that talks about women feel like they need to be like at least 90% qualified for the job before they even apply for the job. And people who identify as men are probably even less than 50% qualified, but feel more, feel confident to apply. So what are some of those socializations or the ideas that we have, and how can we unlearn that? So I want to move more into your specific roles and what you do, because I'm looking at time and I see the questions and I'm like, folks, they want to hear from you. So let's get more specific, okay? Yishan, I'm going to come to you, and I want to start off with you because you are an ED at a nonprofit organization that does work around poverty, right? And we know that poverty is linked to lack of resources and underfunded schools, which ultimately impacts the quality of life and the possibility for Black and brown communities to live their full potential. So as an ED that works for a nonprofit, working to break generational poverty in communities, what do you think needs to happen at a foundational level for us to see improvements over time?
Oh, man. Aside from burning the system down and starting a brand new one, I think, a lot of the times what people talk about, and I think we are at a critical time right now, people are acknowledging the inequities so much more and braver than they ever be before to talk about the inequities that we have in the education system, in the racial justice and criminal justice, right? All of these are contributing factors of why there is, a significant gap. And also, every time that I hear someone say Boston is at risk of losing talent, it hurts my heart, because I literally work with thousands of young people who are eager, ready, capable, talented, ready to work. And, our sector, and especially in youth development, I think the most challenging part is that a lot of the efforts have been put into preparing young people to go into systems that still see them as threatening and that still see them as a liability. So we can do the downstream work all we want of like teaching our young people how to do an interview well, and having them make eye contact and shake their hands and fix our educational system, and all those things still have to be done. But unless we really address preparing the workplaces to be more, to have more belonging for people of color to arrive, none of those things will ever get addressed, right? Because I've worked in more than 20 years in the sectors, have seen generations of young people graduate from college, go into workforces, and feel physically drained at the end of every day because they still face microaggression. They still continue to feel like they don't belong there. And so we've done a lot of investment on the downstream work, preparing our young people to be able to be seen as talented, right? It's absurd that we have to say that out loud, but yes, in the same zip code, we have talent. You don't need to import them. Give me a call tomorrow, I'll give you a list of like 25 and that you can call and hire the right way. But the work and the employers have to do their work. You gotta be ready to evaluate how you do the hiring process. Are you intentionally screening out candidates because your hiring process is innately biased? And thinking about what is your promotion process? Who is training your managers who's supervising a diverse workforce? All of those things have to fundamentally change.
Like prop. Okay, folks are like real. When you said burn it down, I saw the reactions, but also like you deserve your role, right? And I just can imagine what that looks like for you on a personal level. But also, I like what you did there, where it wasn't like prepare our young folks or our young adults to get into that workforce, but it's the reverse, right? Because if we put them in those same workforces that are continuing that cycle of making people have self-doubt and not, connecting them to the resources that they need, then what's the point, right? And so really thinking about what are some of those policies and practices we have at our companies. And I know we have a question for that to share with folks, some tips we have. So thanks for kicking us off with that. All right, Christina, what you and Farah, y'all are doing a lot, okay? Right? I mean, all of you are doing a lot in terms of just doing amazing things in your community and in your professional life. Both of you are actively creating pathways for Black and Brown people to excel and thrive in many aspects of your life, right? I would love for you both to speak on what policies and practices in your workplace and beyond have supported you in getting this type of work done. So feel free to quickly talk about your main role at both of your jobs and sort of what else you're doing in the outer world to make sure that people have these connections and possibilities to be their great selves. So happy to start off with you, Farah, and then Christina.
Sure. I think I mentioned a little bit about my BU experience with the previous question. So I'll talk a little bit about Lightworks with this one. I think in terms of policies that enable opportunities for professionals of color to thrive socially, I think a lot about the business case in everything that I do. I think a lot of times people, particularly from majority groups, think of DEI as simply like the good thing to do or like a feel good thing to do. But in reality, there's a monetary value to that, and there's an organizational asset in bringing diverse groups of people together and helping people feel like they can bring their whole self to work or to play. So I approach every business as an opportunity to make that case. A restaurant, a lounge, a bar, it doesn't serve them a whole lot financially. 100, 200, 300, and 50 people just to say, hey, look at how diverse our events are. It's about, those people feeling good, being able to spend money, feeling like their patronage matter. And when people feel good about themselves and they feel respected and valued, they'll engage with their local economy more in the form of restaurant patronage and support to cultural institutions, etc. One of the largest events I did, for example, was at the Museum of Fine Arts. That was over 500 people. It was really well attended. There was a lot of energy there. And who would have otherwise thought that you could host a party and a fashion show in a 150-year-old predominantly white institution, right? The fine arts have historically been sort of a signal of affluence and a certain sort of socioeconomic demographic. But in sort of engaging in that partnership and making the case for the benefit to the museum and to the community and the culture and being welcoming and opening and broadening their scope of what membership looks like, we were able to find mutual value. And just touching base on the academic work for a little bit, along those same lines, when people feel like they can bring their whole self to work, they'll be more productive at work. I talk a lot about, the psychological safety in being in certain work environments, feeling like you're shielded from what sometimes comes off as a psychological hostility, in microaggressions and imposter syndrome and implicit biases, etc. And studies show that diverse groups are also more creative, right? So being able to bring more innovative ideas to the table in an academic environment where we're training scientists, this is the kind of mindset and perspective and collaboration that will really help us solve some of our most complex biomedical challenges. So keeping all of those things in mind.
Yeah, thank you for giving us that range and just scope of people being able to understand what this looks like and on a larger scale, not just in the workplace, but how we communicate with one another in different groups, in community settings, and in events. I'm looking at the time now and want to let y'all know that we're definitely going to go a little bit over time in terms of the moderated panel, but we'll try to wrap up this section so we can get your questions. If you have questions, just let you know, please put in the Q&A so it won't get lost in the chat. But I love all the sharing that's happening right now. All right, Christina, take it away.
Farrah said so much good stuff. I don't know what to say. But I would say, for me, especially throughout my journey working in tech, I have learned, and this is something that I hope everyone here manifests, but stop asking for permission and just do it. Just stop. Because a lot of times you're not going to get permission. And what I've learned is just do it and ask for forgiveness later if someone gets upset. Oh, I didn't know. Sorry. So I know, for example, when I first started at a large tech company, I won't say the name, but I started at a very large, prominent tech company here in the Boston area. They did not have any diversity and inclusion when I was there. Me and two other colleagues decided at the time, that's when I believe Trayvon Martin happened, and no one addressed anything. And we all, people of color that worked there, felt very uncomfortable, very unsafe, very unheard. We put it upon ourselves to just start the first ERG, which is an employee resource group that is actually still existent to this day. And now that entire tech company has a whole diversity inclusion program, right? Where they have multiple people on the team now, and they do a lot more partnerships. But that really all started with me and two colleagues just being fed up and be like, no, this needs to be a priority here, and we're gonna make it a priority. So we really just started it. And how we did it is we started just by first inviting, obviously, all the minorities, all people of color at the organization, which at the time there was about 800 people, maybe 80 people of color, maybe. And also inviting all the leadership to come and support as allies. And that's really how it started. Moving forward from that, I'm also leading an organization called Women with Purpose. Some of you may have heard of it before. We do professional development workshops for women of color. That also started without permission. I really was passionate about giving back to the community, especially to the most marginalized in this country, which are women of color, right? I wanted to give back in a way that can empower them and teach them things that they would never have learned anywhere else. So our workshops, for example, we've done workshops on salary negotiation, on on public speaking, on mental and emotional health. We've done workshops on civic engagement, how to be more civically engaged in your local elections. We've done workshops on financial literacy, how to manage debt, how to invest, how to start your own business, right? A lot of these types of workshops that I wish had existed when I was growing up, right? And when I was trying to figure it out. So really just challenging the status quo, and not gonna lie, it's not always gonna be kumbaya, happy-go-lucky, people accepting what it is that you're fighting for. But if you know what you're fighting for and you're passionate about it, then keep going and don't ask for permission. There's been so many women that I've worked with in the past who have the skills and have the ability to do all these amazing things, but they feel like, oh, I need the certification to do this, or I need to get like my third master's to do this, or I need to do this. And it's like, no, you don't. You have the skills to do it. So just do it, right? Do it. And I promise you, when you start doing things like this and you really go in with passion and purpose, you will start manifesting. People around you will start being attracted to you. People around you will start going to you for these types of things, whatever it is that you're passionate about, right? I guarantee you, because I'm living proof of that, right? I did not come from a learning and development background. I didn't study learning and organizational development. And now I'm head of learning and development at a startup and also the career program, because I did professional development workshops for over 5 years, right? And I learned from so many other amazing people along the way. So just thinking about non-traditional ways to get things done and stop asking for permission.
Thank you so much for sharing that. And I think that helps us all realize and understand that, besides organizational change, like what are some things that we can take back and have power over? And I think you bring that perspective so loud and clear, and I appreciate it so much. All right. So Uver, you've been at MathWorks for over 20 years. I remember I was going through LinkedIn and I was like, wow, I'm so excited to be talking on the panel, right? And it's impressive to me because we often talk about how difficult it is for Black women to advance within a company or organization, but here you are, 2 decades strong. So can you tell us what you think contributed to the longevity of your time at MathWorks? What needed to happen for you to succeed there? And I know some folks are sharing some organizational things that need to happen. So it'll be super helpful to hear what went right, what went wrong in both your professional and personal life for you to be where you are now.
Okay, so how much time do we have again?
I know, that's well, the crowd has voted for a part 2, and some folks aren't complaining if we go like a little bit of 5 minutes over time, but I definitely want to get folks off of here before the actual ending time. So you have 2 minutes on the book, so we'll see how you do with that.
Okay, gotcha. So I'll take it from there. And thank you so much. And wonderful answers to the previous questions from all of my co-panelists. So one of the biggest things is education. So one of the biggest items is, it's not just per se having a degree, because in my roles, I've been different types of engineers in MathWorks for over the 20 years. And with that degree, it's more so the skills that you can acquire. Now, I know that many of us may be going ahead and looking out for skills in other places, which is fine. But in some places, being able to have a degree associated with those skills is important. So my entry point into MathWorks, well, I went to BU and I had my undergraduate degree in biomedical engineering. That got me in the door at MathWorks. Then while I was at MathWorks, I got my master's degree from Northeastern University on a totally different topic in geographic information systems. But each of those degrees helped me get my foot in the door, whether it was, directly in the door or into another department. And having those skills helped out big time. The second item is there were certain managers that I think I purposefully decided I wanted to work for. Because one of the themes that I saw in the chat, which is so true, all of us have bias in some way, shape, or form. And I think it's good for us to recognize that, but also paying attention to our inner voice. When you are interacting with certain individuals, I would say, listen to that, because there's something about that individual that is causing you to think, do I really want to work with this person? It's not just for a project, but also kind of longer term. Do I want to be managed by this person? The other piece too is when you start to get those ideas, definitely, try to follow up, ask around, see how people have had relationships with certain managers if you have that opportunity. And I think I chose certain managers I wanted to work with on smaller projects than larger projects to build that internal recognition that highlighted, yes, she can do X, Y, Z. She has the skills. She has the knowledge. The other piece too is it was my mindset. My mindset is, you know what? I may not look like all the people in the room, but you know what? I deserve to be here just as much as you. One of the biggest things that I think helped me out, especially over the past few years, is just highlighting, you know what? I deserve to have a seat at this table. Why don't I? Why shouldn't I be there? There's no reason. I have the same skills as so-and-so. I look at so-and-so's work and I'm like, well, okay, he's doing this. Well, I can do this too, and so much better. So I think I've gotten better at building my confidence over the years to be able to highlight to my managers, whether it's on one project or, overall to my manager that's going to give me that, review. Listen, this is what I've done. It goes back to the idea of having that journal. My LinkedIn post or my journal, I actually highlight that as a part of my review and go, oh, look at all these great things I've done. Look at these panels I participated in, or look at this project that got completed by this time frame with these results. So I think one of the biggest themes has been making certain that you have the skill set, and I got that through 2 degrees, making certain that you're aware of who you may be working with on projects to help you build up your additional skills and in some ways your confidence. And third, your confidence, where you're pointing out, you know what, I belong here too. I know that may not be easy for a lot of us, but I implore you to think, well, why do you think you're not good enough? What's making you think that? I mean, the whole thing is you're always going to have people that will put noise into your ear for a variety of things. Who are these people? Do they really matter? What is it that's so special about them? And after I said, you know what? Okay, I can take your feedback, but quite honestly, I tried to look objectively and it's not really helping out. So thanks. I'll move on and continue to see what's going to help me out. So I have to admit, that's helped me out.
Thank you so much for sharing that, right? I think each of you have given us an idea of sort of what it means to be yourself with your identities, but also how you've pushed through certain systemic barriers, personal barriers that might exist to where you are. But I also know that even though we try our best and we do our best, we know that the structure in the system is rigged, right? And we all don't start from the same playing field, even when we do try our best. So I know some folks here want to know, what do you all think employers need to do to censor the advancement of Black women and women of color in the workplace? Now I'm only giving you all a quick minute to do this, and I know you probably have a lot to say, but I really want to just really focus, even if it's 1 or 2 things that you think is critical for workplaces to begin thinking about or to continue doing. So I want to start us off with Christina, and then Yi-Chin, Louver, and then Farah.
Sorry about that. I actually didn't hear the last thing that you said. Can you repeat the question?
Absolutely. So just what do you think employers need to do to censor the advancement of Black women and women of color in the workplace?
That's a toughie. Well, first and foremost, hire Black women and hire women of color. That's first and foremost, right? Stop saying, oh, we want to diversify ourselves, and then you look at your entire employees and there's no diversity. So that's the first thing. And holding your leadership accountable, right? Okay, you say you want X amount of Black or Latina employees. Okay, well, where are we going to start, right? Because it shouldn't all be everybody in customer support or the first entry level of a business. Okay, are we going to have management as well? Are we going to have someone on the executive leadership team? And really challenging our leaders, right? Because at the end of the day, as I have learned this through my own experience and my own challenges throughout my career, is really, really understanding leadership and doing your research on leadership before joining a company. Because again, if you see a company and they are all, their whole website has Black and brown people smiling, like, join our company, and then you actually look at the employees that work there and there's no Black and brown people, there's a disconnect there, right? And there's clearly, especially if you look at the executive leadership team and you see absolutely no diversity, meaning no women, no people of color, nobody from the LGBTQ community, I will tell you right now, if that's what you see, they probably don't give a shit about diversity. And I'm going to be straight up with you because I've been through it, right? Where I've gone to a company and I've been like, oh, your website's so great. How come everybody's a white man at the top and everybody's looks the same on the leadership team, where everybody on management is a white person, but yet you care about diversity, right? So really, really challenging, and doing your research before you go somewhere, because I will tell you, and I think Farah mentioned this earlier, like, At the end of the day, you're going to spend the majority of your time at your office, at work. Well, right now, remote, right? But the majority of your day is spent at work. And if you are miserable, feeling marginalized, feeling a constant state of anxiety, feeling like you don't fit in, feeling not included, feeling like you can't bring your authentic self to the workplace, you will be miserable. And you will not produce as well as you could, as if you were somewhere that actually included you and empowered you. So one thing I would say, I would challenge employers, first and foremost, change your recruitment processes, right? There's a lot of barriers that people that are set on employees, like you have to have this degree, you have to have this amount of qualified years experience for like an entry-level role. You're gonna cut the shit. You need to start hiring for potential and not just pedigree, right? There's a lot of things that are not taught in school. You cannot, and I was talking to Farah about this earlier, you cannot teach someone grit. You cannot teach someone hard work ethic. You cannot teach someone how to be a problem solver, right? These are a lot of qualities of some of the best people, best workers in the world, right? They have these qualities, and a lot of these qualities you don't get in a degree. Like, yeah, great, you have your PhD, okay, but do you actually work, past the hours of your job to get something done, right? Are you actually really passionate about the work that you're doing? Are you a collaborative team player, right? So really looking at other characteristics other than what school did you go to? Oh, did you go to a state school versus a Harvard or a Yale? Like, no. I went to BC. I know for a fact, I went to Boston College. I know for a fact that my name, just the name of that school, got me into several places, into several spaces that I never would have gotten into before. And I will say that 100%. I know my privilege, right? But another thing I challenge you is if you are in a place of privilege, help the woman behind you. Help them in, advocate for them, especially if you're a white woman. Make your boss uncomfortable. Hey, how come Fatima is getting paid $20,000 less than I am for the same role? It's going to be uncomfortable, but change is uncomfortable.
Thank you so much. You left, hopefully folks were taking notes, right? Because you just left so many things that people can do. And I see some people snapping and yes, and people resonating with a lot of things that you shared and felt. So this is not just separate from those of us who are in the panel, but I know that some of you who've experienced this and some of you are also looking for tools. And I think you did an amazing job of connecting the two. So I know we want to quickly wrap this up and go to Q&A. So I would love to hear you all's final thoughts on that question. And if you feel good, we can look at the questions. And if we have more time, we'll continue with our script. But I keep seeing the questions increase and I'm excited for you all to address them. So I think Yi-Chin, you were next. If not, totally fine. But go ahead and let us know quick some tips that folks can take with them in the workplace to center the advancement of Black women and women of color.
Sure. I would just, I think I echo everything Christiana has said and add two things to it. I think one, on the systems level, on the institutional level, be honest with where you are, right? When was the last time you did an equity audit within your own organization that shows you, exactly who you pay, at what level, who you promote, how often, what's your candidate pool look like? And that's where you should start. You shouldn't start anywhere else without knowing where your baseline is, right? And I think on the individual manager level, I would push people to say, who are you not paying attention to? I think that we're in a capitalist society. We oftentimes favor efficiency and productivity over other things, and which means that people that can do the work the best, the fastest, oftentimes gets, that's the name that's mentioned in the room. And as a manager, you have a responsibility to take a step back and say, whose name has not left your mouth in a while and why? Check your own biases, make sure that their name shows up in the queue just as much as others are, because that's the only way people get opportunities.
Snaps. Keep the momentum going. Everything that you just said, absolutely. Alrighty. I think it was Louver and then Farah.
So +1 to everything that both Yi-Chin and Christina have said. One item, and someone said it in the chat, and this is something that I think about in relation to certain companies I've been exposed to, put it that way, unconscious bias training, because I think that has happened way too often, and it's leaving a lot of people out in the cold, so to speak. So that's just one item I would add on top of everything that's been said already. That's all.
Absolutely, because we assume that everybody's on the same page. And I know unconscious bias is not the means to equities, because folks are like, that's not going to do it. But yes, I see your hands. And we do unconscious bias training. We always tell our folks that this is a stepping stone to so much more, right? It's part of a larger strategy. And so it is a great way to get your foot in the door to help people understand concepts of DEI. Thank you for putting that plug in. Farrah, close us out before we move on to Q&A.
Sure. So I think I would echo definitely everything that the panelists have mentioned. I would just add two additional things. Once you're actually in a particular workspace or academic environment, whatever have you, two things that come to mind. The first being burnout, and what I sometimes think of as this sort of like minority tax. I think, a lot of well-intentioned companies don't realize the extra burdens that are placed when you are the only Black woman or one of few people of color in an organization, and also expected to carry all of the DEI related work, the being on committees and being part of recruitment efforts, a lot of which in some cases aren't considered part of your annual review or aren't considered part of the work that actually pays you. So on the one end, we see this a lot in academia, where it's the same students that are being part of panels and outreach events and things like that. But at the end of the day, they're there to get a degree, right? So those things aren't going to help them accomplish that. So being mindful of the tax and the mental strain that comes from being passionate about DEI, and in ways that can be rewarded as well, especially like when we're thinking about advancement in particular roles. The things, if DEI is important, then you have to show that in how you reward and compensate the employees who help to carry that work. But then on the extreme end, also making sure that people's professional and career goals are in line with the kinds of opportunities that they're receiving. I saw a post on LinkedIn, for example, that shows a lot of the Fortune 500 companies that we're very familiar with. When you look at their executive leadership, the one or the few people of color have diversity and inclusion in their role, right? And you should see diverse representation across all departments, marketing, finances, et cetera. So enabling people to get the kinds of professional development that are aligned with their strengths and with their professional interests outside of being the diversity recruiter, the diversity person.
Is a word. That is such a word, right? Not having all of us just do one thing. And I think at some point, Toni Morrison talked about that as an author, where it's just like, it's us being distracted at every point, us trying to prove that we matter and that we're valued, and we want to be other things and we want to do other things as well. So as we are in this role, it's perfectly fine, but that's not the only thing that we can do, is speak on racial matters. So I like that you mentioned that. All right, so I hear you. We have like 17 questions. Panelists, feel free to click on that Q&A because you can also see the questions. Here's how we're gonna do the next, let's see, 15 minutes, okay? There's questions. I'm going to read them out loud. Everybody does not have to answer these questions. If you feel like you have the answer right then and there, feel free to answer it. So maybe one or two people answer it, and then we'll move on to the next question. Thumbs up. Sounds good? Alrighty. So Q&A, first question that has the most votes is, my organization only has 2 women of color. How do I ensure that we aren't putting a burden on them to educate everyone else about their experiences and challenges? Whew. It's a good question. Who wants to take a stab at that? I know we sort of alluded to it a bit, but feel free to take a stab.
Okay, everyone's quiet? Okay, that's it. So I guess one of the items where this is happening to a lot of women of color, I feel, at a lot of places now. Number one is definitely acknowledge that, don't have them be in the role of educator in terms of their experience, or make them be the educator, because in addition to just having to do that, but there's also emotional labor involved with having to recount their experiences and challenges. The biggest piece I would say is definitely, and other panelists feel free to jump in, is to also make certain that they can feel supported. So in terms of how to make them feel supported, that can take on a variety of ways. But I think the first, I'm going to say it's a request. Make certain you do not have them speak at every single meeting about their experiences and challenges. Do not make them be involved with every single panel that you may have internally to speak about their experiences and challenges. Make certain that you at least check in on them to see, how are they doing in the first place? Where are they? If they feel safe speaking with you and interacting with you, but do not try to force them or guilt trip them into sharing their experiences. And third, if possible, whenever possible, listen to them if they choose to share their experiences and challenges and try to internalize that. That's what I have as the starting point. So others.
Just to piggyback off of that, I think, which was, I think, alluded to earlier, this is where there's a great opportunity for actual formal training and workshops and professional development in terms of, just working with diverse teams and being able to support people across cultural differences. I work in diversity and inclusion now, but that wasn't always the case. And I found myself having to speak out for the fact that just because I'm a woman of color doesn't mean I'm qualified to speak on DEI related things that I don't necessarily feel like I have a strong competency in, right? Other than my lived experience. And I think to Louvier's point, there's also the emotional baggage that we wear, right? Especially in this age where racial tensions are continuing to rise. I've had a lot of people checking in on me, for example, who are very well intentioned, but you know what? I might just want to turn off my screen and not talk about people being killed on television right now. And I should have the space to be able to do that. And at the same time, I'm only speaking or at least this is my personal philosophy. I tend to only speak on behalf of my own experience. I don't speak for all Black women or all people of color either. So I think recognizing some of those distinctions, but I think it goes back to there are people who have a vast amount of scholarship and expertise in those areas. And I think we should sometimes leave it to people who are more skilled in having those conversations.
Thanks. I think those
Can I
points
add?
are great, and I want to. Oh, okay. I was gonna go to the. Okay, go ahead. Really? Yeah, go ahead.
It'll be quick, promise. So I agree with everything that was just said. First and foremost, we should not be placing the burden of these types of conversations on your only employees of color. So that's first and foremost, because as everybody just mentioned, it's emotionally taxing, right? There are plenty of companies and organizations, consultancy groups. She Geeks Out is one of them that does diversity and inclusion consulting, right? There are plenty of experts that you can reach out to come into your organization and really help you develop a diversity and inclusion program for your organization. And that's what their jobs are, right? And if you are going to include women of color or anyone, to if they want to take the lead on this, right? Of course, don't say no if somebody really is passionate about it and wants to take the lead. But what is that going to look like in terms of their job responsibilities? Because that's going to be an additional job, right? And then also bringing that up into the business case. Okay, so I'm doing my job as marketing, whatever it is, consultant, whatever, and I'm also going to be leading this women of color group or this Black women at BU or whatever it is, right? How am I going to be compensated accordingly? And also, does my manager know that this is also going to be on my plate, right? Because the other thing to remember is that women, especially women of color, especially Black and Latino women of color, we are proving ourselves every day in that job. So not only do we feel the pressure to be the best, because a lot of us don't even feel like we belong there, now we're going to be feeling like we have to do above and beyond and run an ERG, right? So just another perspective.
So much. Such richness. All right, moving to the next question. What specific strategies can white allies in junior positions leverage their privilege in white male-dominated workplaces and hold those spaces accountable to their lip service and D&I goals? I know this is a layer question. We can sit here and dissect this. I can already imagine. But really quickly, what are some tips you would give this person or a group of people who upvoted this? How would you answer this?
I think I'll start here. I think for me is to get out of this this limitation and the scarcity mentality that there is only certain spots for opportunities, right? If you are white and privileged in a male white dominated workplaces, you are going to get more opportunities. Your name is you're gonna get called on for more things. And it's, if you really are, sincere about sharing your privilege, decline some of those opportunities and suggest someone else who otherwise wouldn't be considered. I consider that kind of sharing the space, right? Sharing the privilege and being able to, because when you only have limited opportunities, unless somebody step aside, nobody gets to step up. So, and it can be very scary to do because it could feel like you're putting your own advancement on the line, but the reality is you're not. Your name is going to keep getting mentioned because that's how white supremacist culture works, right? So sharing your privilege in that way can be incredibly powerful.
Yeah, I would definitely echo each, and I think even on a more micro level, which I think you also mentioned earlier, just being mindful of how that privilege is shared at every level of the working dynamic, like in meetings, for example, women, people of color. People from international backgrounds, for example, are more likely to get talked over or are more likely to get discredited. And then when someone else from a majority group says it, all of a sudden, certain comments might take on a different meaning. So being able to sort of think about who you're bringing in to conversation, that's something that I try to practice a lot in like meeting dynamics and in regular sort of like professional interaction. I think so-and-so was trying to say something. If we could go back to the point that this person made before, thinking about how you're enabling space for people to be part of the conversation and decision making and strategies and things like that. And again, to I think Yuchin's point, thinking about who else needs to be here. I'm always keeping in mind, and that's a conversation that I also have with my colleagues. If you feel comfortable sharing with me what some of your goals are, I can keep that in mind as I'm working on different projects or different initiatives. Like, hey, I think so-and-so expressed an interest in this. Can I invite them into this meeting or to be part of this working group? So finding different ways to collectively bring each other up.
Thank you all so much for that. And something that we noticed, I'm going to check this question off, but something that a lot of folks have also mentioned, I think was mentioned in the chat box, is tying folks' promotions and being able to excel in their company to diversity, equity, and inclusion. So if you have competencies that you want your employees to achieve, what does it look like using that DEI lens and then attributing that during the performance review so people are exercising and practicing that muscle, and you also hold people accountable that way as well. All right, next question. What are questions we should be asking companies and expectations we should be setting around DEI as we're job seeking? Everyone's like, Christina, awesome. Great.
So it's tough to ask these kind of questions during an interview, just because a lot of times recruiters may just tell you what you want to hear. So as I mentioned before, like really doing your research on a company before you even interview there, before you even apply there. And that means, and that's not just going to a website, that's not just looking up reviews on Glassdoor, but that's actually reaching out to people that work there. Maybe reaching out to a person of color that works there and getting their perspective and telling them like, hey, I really love the mission of your company, or I really love the product, or I really want to join your team, but I'm a little hesitant. I would love to know a little bit more about your experience working there as a woman, or your experience working there as a person of color. How is the culture? Could we set up maybe 15 minutes just to chat so I could learn a little bit more? So that's one thing I would highly recommend. It's actually a strategy we teach in my course called reverse recruiting, where you're essentially recruiting for yourself. You're being proactive and reaching out to people to learn more about the companies that you're interested in applying to or interviewing at, so that you have a good lens before you even go into the interview, right? And in terms of in the interview process, I mean, you can definitely feel free to ask questions. This is a two-way conversation. A lot of times people in an interview think, oh, it's just them asking you questions and that's it. No, 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 no. This is a mutual fit, right? You want to make sure that you're going to be happy there too. Not just all about them. You have the power in this case. And a lot of times with recruiters, I mean, their jobs are to bring people like you in, right? That's their job. So you can feel free to ask those questions. You can say, hey, what's the diversity? What's the population at this company? What's the percentage of people that are people of color? How many people on the executive leadership team are women or are people of color? And if you notice the hesitancy and we have nothing, that tells you a lot, right? So just remembering that it's a two-way conversation and you're going to be spending the majority of your time there. So you also need to be in a place where you'll feel good and empowered and included.
Awesome. Thanks so much for that. And I know we have about 10 minutes left, so we probably won't be able to answer all questions, but we'll try to get through as much as we can. Were you going to add something, Louver?
Yes, in terms of, I agree with everything that Christina said. And in regards to reverse recruiting, that has happened to me several times through LinkedIn. And it's really helpful to have a platform like LinkedIn. You can do that in that venue and not have to worry about, exchanging email messages. That's all.
Awesome.
If I could just add a quick note also to that, because I consider myself a very data-driven person in general, in terms of philosophy, but in doing so, I recognize that data without context is really just numbers, right? So sometimes having those personal experiences and anecdotes, and also understanding the level of engagement that the organization has with DEI efforts. There might be low percentages now, but what is the amount of attention and resource that's being allocated towards DEI? Are they going out and recruiting to diverse organizations and institutions? Are they building institutional partnerships? Are they helping to build capacity for DEI so that when people come, they stay and there's not always 2 or 3 or 4 people? So I think being able to provide some context to that is really important too.
Thank you, everyone. All right, y'all. Next question. I appreciate you all so much. How do you personally define what it means to bring your full self to work? I think some of us alluded to that earlier. But yeah, this could be its own panel, but really quickly, how would you all define that?
So I'll just start by saying, it's your entire way of being, how you want to look, how you like to act. Hopefully, it's in alignment with what's happening with the company. But so many other things that you would typically have to kind of, I'd say, change, or you feel you have to change. I know the topic of code switching was mentioned not too long ago. So even something, and this is not simple. Okay, I keep getting a message that something's been extended for another 30 minutes.
Yeah,
Wonderful.
I think.
So,
Right.
okay, wonderful.
Yeah.
But I mean, even something, for example, like me in my role, I have to work with customers of MathWorks. And one of the biggest topics I struggled with for the longest time, I used to get my hair relaxed. And I said, you know what? I'm tired of doing this. So I'd like to change up my hairstyle. And just being able to even think about that concept, let alone actually implement it, was a sign, you know what? It looks like I'm comfortable here. This is one way of bringing my full self to work, but also being happy with saying, you know what, this is my style of speech. This is how I plan to, dress in terms of, yes, I'm still going to follow the company guidelines, but, I'm wearing these colors. So those are a few aspects of bringing my whole self to work, but also making certain that you are feeling not just confident, but also emotionally comfortable as a part of being in that topic of your full self to work. So that's my starting point, and anyone else can follow up.
When I work with young people who are going into not so diverse workforce, the thing that we tell them, and which I have really come to love for myself, is you are who you have been looking for. You are who you've been looking for. And having gone through this journey and I live in the intersection of a woman, Asian, and an immigrant. And there's no way for you to win. If I'm too quiet, then I don't advance because I don't fit into the traditional mold of a leader. If I'm too loud, I've had someone says, Dan, like you're loud for an Asian. And I realized very, very quickly, like, all right, well, if I can't win, then I'm just going to be my best self, because there's nobody else that's looking for me the way that, and love me the way that I would love myself. It does take a while to be able to kind of come to that, right? Because we are not just battling the microaggressions of work, but we're battling our internal narrative too. You can't, I think the microaggression of work takes a whole lot longer to try to figure it out how to do, how to manage, but you can start with what are you saying to yourself, and recognize that, like, you are exactly who you need to be.
Awesome. Yeah. Y'all are like looking at me like, should I answer it? I know we have probably about like 5 more minutes. So if you want to quickly add Christina and Farah, totally fine.
I'll go next really quick. So for me, I'm currently in a role where I can be my full self at work. And it's probably one of the only times in my entire life of working that I've been able to do that. And I would say first and foremost, being able to be your full authentic self at work is just having what Farah mentioned earlier, that psychological air. Just really having that psychological safe space of knowing that it's okay if you make a mistake. It's okay if you need help and you need to reach out to someone. Knowing that it's okay if you're not perfect. Getting rid of this idea of competition, of always competing with that next person, always competing to get to that next level, because it shouldn't be that way at work. You shouldn't feel like you're in constant competition, because at the end of the day, everybody works on teams, right? We work together. We're supposed to collaborate. We're supposed to work together to make something better, right? Even if you will have your own business and you're your own boss and there's no one else that you work with, you still got to work with clients. No matter what, you got to work with people, right? So for me, just feeling psychologically safe and feeling like I don't have to code switch has been huge for me. I've made a whole career off of code switching. I'm really, really good at it. Like, I teach interviewing skills because I'm really good at interviewing. I've almost gotten every single thing that I've interviewed for, right? And I've interviewed for a lot of things. So not having to code switch when I meet with my manager, not having to code switch when I'm delivering a presentation or a meeting is so liberating. So for me, that's bringing your full self to work. And because I'm able to do that, I produce so much more and I'm much more efficient in the workplace.
I'll just quickly add to that. I, co-sign everything that the other panelists have said, but also it's sort of a tricky one for me because I really feel the most productive at work with boundaries. I like to distinguish between work and the things that I do outside of work. So a lot of times it's very much intentional for me that you don't see the whole 100% view of who I am and what I do, because that's where I'm able to focus. So for me, feeling like I can bring my whole self to work means that I can come in and out of those boundaries within my own level of comfort, right? So if I feel like having a conversation about celebrating Juneteenth and what it means to me today, I can do that. But if I want to close the door to my office and just get work done, I don't feel obligated to sort of like put on this sort of like cultural representation either. So being able to engage in ways that are comfortable for me, I think are really important.
Awesome. All right, y'all. We only got time for one more question, so forgive us if we did not get to your question. I was quickly skimming, and our panelists, you all have given us so much wisdom and knowledge and insight. And I'm looking back at the chat, and there's so much being shared there. So I just appreciate all that's happening right now. And we might have to do a part 2, so we'll figure this out. But some of these questions we've sort of answered. So if I skipped your question, it's because I feel like we've talked about it. I think the one part about, we talked a bit about confidence coming up. And as we talk about DEI work, it's hard for many of us, regardless of our identities. And each of our identities bring its own challenges. So how can we battle our internal critic when speaking about DEI, as this is new territory for a lot of us, right? So whether you are someone within that marginalized group, which everyone doesn't identify with that term, for the sake of language, I'll use that term, or if you're in a more privileged group, well, how do we do this work?
I think I might need to hear the question one more time.
Absolutely. So the question is by Rose Sinclair, in case you wanted to scroll to that person's name. Confidence came up a lot today. How can we battle our internal critic when speaking about DEI, as this is new territory for a lot of us?
I'll start. I do a lot of confidence building in my program. So because confidence is key. Ultimately, confidence is knowing who you are and what you stand for. It doesn't necessarily mean you're the loudest person in the room. It doesn't necessarily mean that you are the most vocal and that you're going to be like this huge advocate for everything, right? But I think Yichin mentioned earlier, like doing things like speaking up for someone when they're not in the room, right? And saying, hey, hey, Karen or Becky or whatever, you did a great job at this event. Oh, you know what? But Yichin actually helped me a lot. So I think she should get some of this credit too, right? Doing things like that, which don't take a lot of effort. It's really a small thing, but advocating for someone else, right? And showing that you care and showing that this is important to you. And again, confidence is not being the loudest person in the room. It's really essentially confidence is knowing who you are and what you stand for. What's your mission? What's your vision? What are your values, right? And being really comfortable with that. That's what confidence is. Every time I ask my engineers, I'm like, who do you guys think of when you think confidence? They all say, oh, like Oprah, or like Arnold Schwarzenegger, or like Elon Musk, right? They always say those kind of people. And what all those people have in common is that you can't tell them anything because they know who they are and what they stand for. Right? You can't use anything against Oprah because she's shared her whole story. She owns her whole narrative. You can't say anything to her, right? So really, that's what confidence is. So in terms of speaking about DEI, it doesn't mean you have to be this scholarly person who's done tons of research on DEI and you know all the facts and the statistics and the Black American history or whatever. It doesn't mean that. It means that you want to make a space for other people in little ways, whether that's I've used my privilege. I'm a Latina woman, right? But I come from a very educated background. I came from a home, two parent home. My whole family's in education. Going to college for me was never a question. It was like I was going to go to college, right? And I know a lot of other Latinos is not like that for them. A lot of people come from low income backgrounds with one, single parent household. And so for me, I used my privilege by building Women with Purpose and creating these spaces where I could teach other people things that I've learned throughout my life from my mentors. And like, I've been fortunate enough to have all these amazing people guide me. So I use my privilege to help others in that way. It could be even something as simple as like being someone's mentor or giving somebody advice. Or if someone reaches out and is like, hey, like I want to interview at your company, taking 20 minutes to have a call with them, giving them some advice for the interview process. It could be so many different things. It doesn't have to be this huge show.
I think for the one thing I would add, I love the idea that Lavere have talked about keeping a journal of all of your accomplishments, right? I think a reminder of where you've been, who you are, so incredibly important. And you are going to be, it doesn't matter where you are in your career or how tenured you are going to be in environments sometimes or sometimes all the time that are trying to break you down. So just like surround yourself with people who build you up. Make sure that you have people that build you up all the time, and spend as much time with those folks as possible, because there's nobody else. I mean, the system is always going to try to break you, right? I mean, this is a capitalism machine here. And so that's how it works. And so, if you have people who's going to love you and continue to build you up, that's how we're going to overcome our inner critic, is by also both working on ourselves and then also the external affirmation that we're enough. And only the people who build you up can do that for you. So make sure you got a group of people that's going to be like, you're a champion wherever you go, your cheer squad wherever you show up. So
I would echo what the other panelists have said, but I would add to that, recognizing that in those moments of self-doubt and maybe lacking in self-confidence, also recognizing what are some of the coping mechanisms that we've adapted to, and how do we also disrupt those patterns. There's a woman by the name of Valerie Young who did a talk at BU on imposter syndrome, and she talked about a number of different things that we do when we start to get into those feelings, from self-sabotage and procrastinating on projects because we tell ourselves we're not going to get that award or we're not going to get that opportunity anyways, to flying under the radar and doing just enough so that you don't get noticed. So recognizing, like, when I start to develop those feelings, what are some of the things that I do that get in my way, and how can I help to work against that, in terms of like the confidence building part. But I think in terms of the DEI part, I would go back to sort of this duality between our lived experiences and our personal values, versus like what does the scholarship and the science say. And there's a lot of information that's out there in terms of like being able to do that self-education. And a lot of times I think part of the challenge is having the language to describe the experience. A lot of times, when we're confronted with things that we know are unjust, our brains are going crazy, right? Like, what do I say? Like, did I really just hear that? Like, that's crazy. Like, I have to say something. I have to do something. And sometimes half of the battle is kind of having that knowledge and that language in our back pocket to be able to almost practice, rehearse, like, this is what I see as a pattern in my organization. And the next time this happens, this is what I'm going to say, or this is how I'm going to respond. Or you might need to pull someone to the side. But being able to proactively identify and think about how you want to position yourself to be an advocate or an ally, I think can go a long way.
Absolutely. Christina, Farah, Louver, Yichin, you all are amazing, and I mean that in all caps. So if I can like write with my hand, I would. You've left us with so much to think about, and we know that this work is life work, right? So that's why this conversation extended. That's why we're still having this conversation, and if we wanted to, we could keep having this conversation. But I also want to be respectful to everyone's time and their expectations. What I saw in the chat, and how I saw the amount of connections, folks talking about their hair and getting twists, to talking about organizations and what we need to do to address DEI work. This is the work, right? And you all have shown how broad it is, and how we need to address it from every angle. So I don't want to hold us too long. We've recorded at least pieces of this. We'll put it together and send it to everyone who RSVP'd. I'll also leave the platform open. So if you all want to continue networking and mingling and continuing the conversation, please do so. And we hope that you can attend more of our sessions. We might be changing some of the formats and making them more open network and some more structured. So stay tuned for that. Other than that, anybody have last words? I don't even want to give it to y'all because for me, I love y'all so much. But does anybody have any quick last words they want to share? No? Oh, no, you're like, no, honestly, you can't. You can say your last words if you want. All right, no? All right.
My last word, I always like to have a last word. But again, besides stop asking for permission, is to challenge the status quo. Challenge it, right? These systems were built for a reason. Now it's time for us to challenge it. And it looks like there's been a lot of challenging going on these past few months. So let's keep the momentum going. It's just the beginning.
Thank you so much. All right, everyone have a good evening or good day wherever you are in the world. And thanks for tuning in. Take care.